My brother invited us to stay with him, saying we wouldn't have to pay for rent or utilities. He expects us to be grateful, especially me, Ashley. I work in finance and my husband Bob is a car mechanic. We live in my childhood home, which isn't where my parents live now. It's actually a family business that my dad used to run. My brother was meant to take over the company, so he studied economics in college and even went to Oxford University to learn more about business. When he came back, he worked with my dad for a few years. When my parents decided to retire, they moved to a place in Aspen, Colorado, to enjoy a peaceful life in nature. Since my brother bought the company, they gave me the family home. I moved in with Bob, and we appreciate living there because it's close to the train station, schools, hospitals, and shops. It's a good place for when our children grow up and leave home. We were excited to start a family and live happily in our new home. But things took an unexpected turn when my mother-in-law started visiting a lot. She's always asking about our family's finances, like how much money my parents have and what I will inherit when they pass away. My mother-in-law often talked about money and my parents' assets, which I found a bit off-putting. I tried not to be too direct and said I wasn't sure how much I'd inherit since I already received the house. I mentioned that lightly, but she insisted that couldn't be true and seemed very interested in discussing my parents' wealth. I decided not to share any details with her or my husband, who is close to her. Then something unbelievable happened. One holiday morning, movers arrived at our house, and my mother-in-law and brother-in-law's family showed up, saying they were moving in. They announced they'd be living with us from now on and expected us to take care of them. When I asked my husband about it, he acted like it was perfectly normal, saying our house was big enough to accommodate them. My sister-in-law then made an outrageous comment. She said they were invited by my brother, so they wouldn't be paying rent or utilities and expected me to handle everything. My brother-in-law even started moving my things around, claiming rooms for their use. I was stunned and felt overwhelmed as they began treating my home like their own. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law have shown a lack of respect before, and this situation pushed me to my limit. I felt that enough was enough and decided I wanted them all to leave. I usually stay calm and don't raise my voice, but having my in-laws move into the house my parents gave me without permission and act like they owned it pushed me over the edge. I lost my temper and yelled at them, which led to an unexpected reaction. One of them slapped me and I was stunned and hurt. Feeling this way made me realize I couldn't live with people who would treat my home like that. I packed my things and decided to move out, renting a temporary apartment while I figured things out. I called my parents to let them know what happened, and they were very upset, especially my dad. He's always been supportive and kind to me, even though he was strict at work. I didn't want to drag my parents into this, but I had no choice since my house was being taken over. While I stayed in the temporary apartment, I knew my husband and his family were using my house without permission. I decided to take action as my brother and father suggested. A few days later, I saw many missed calls and messages from my husband on my phone. I had called the water and electric companies to cut off utilities at the house. Since the house relies entirely on electricity, it was likely very uncomfortable there without power or water. My husband's frantic calls were probably because he was struggling with the situation. I had to cut off the utilities because I couldn't keep paying for them if I wasn't living there. I had the utilities cut off, which made my husband furious. He demanded that I reinstate them immediately, but I wasn't going to agree to that. If they wanted the utilities back on, they should pay for it themselves. They always expect me to cover everything because it's my house, but their actions don't match their words. I made it clear that I wouldn't renew the contract or pay for anything, and if they didn't like it, they should move out. I hung up the phone because my break was ending. After that, my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and brother-in-law all called me, complaining about the lack of electricity and water. They said it was too hot and uncomfortable without water, but I told them it was their problem, not mine, and hung up. I hoped they'd give up and leave soon, but they didn't. After a week with no sign of them leaving, I decided to take stronger action. I contacted my father's company lawyer and asked him to send a legal notice to my husband. The notice was about trespassing. They had moved into my house without permission, driven me out, and were using it as their own. I warned them that I was considering legal action. My husband, clearly shocked and anxious, came to me to discuss a settlement. He was worried about their public image and didn't expect me to take such serious steps. The idea of being sued would be very damaging for my husband and his family. They definitely want to avoid dealing with a lawyer, but they also don't want to give up their current lifestyle. I can tell they're trying to persuade me to let them stay, but I wasn't going to agree to that. My husband, frustrated and at work, yelled at me over the phone, telling me to drop the lawyer and go back to how things were. Despite his anger, I was unaffected and more annoyed by his behavior. I made it clear that I would take legal action if they didn't leave and hung up on him. I was already in discussions with my lawyer about divorce. When I got home, I saw missed calls from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, but I blocked their numbers to avoid more negotiations. Eventually, my husband's family couldn't handle the threat of a lawsuit and moved out. The lawyer then helped the divorce negotiations go smoothly. With the house empty, I arranged for a cleaning service to come in, and I finally returned to a sparkling clean home. While living in the rental was comfortable, being back in my own house felt best. The house needed some repairs, so I consulted with my father and found a good contractor for renovations. Living alone is great. I'm free to relax on the sofa, eat what I want, and enjoy my space without interference. Just as I was settling into this new life, I received a call from my ex-husband for the first time in 3 months. At first, I didn't answer the phone because I didn't recognize the number. But after several calls from the same number, I thought it might be a contractor, so I reluctantly picked up. To my dismay, it was my ex-husband calling. We had divorced 3 months ago with a legal agreement to avoid any contact, so his call was unexpected and confusing. I was about to hang up, but he pleaded with me to listen for a moment. He explained that his company was in financial trouble, his salary would be cut, and his mother was too ill to work. My sister-in-law and her husband couldn't help with living expenses, and my sister-in-law's part-time jobs mostly went towards paying off debts. They were in a desperate situation. Hearing this, I felt no sympathy. They had invaded my house, made life difficult for me, and tried to force me out. Why should I feel sorry for them now? I told him there was nothing I could do and that he should handle his family's problems himself. My ex-husband became increasingly frantic, saying they wouldn't even be able to pay rent or get food soon. He begged me to help, reminding me that we used to be a family, but I wasn't convinced. When I was struggling, he and his family did nothing to support me. They looked down on me, criticized me for my appearance and beliefs, and didn't care about my feelings. Dealing with my ex-husband and his family had been exhausting. My mother-in-law had been particularly intrusive, pushing me to have a baby and subjecting me to strange herbal remedies and unnecessary doctor's appointments. She even spread false rumors about me being barren. Looking back, there wasn't a single positive aspect of my marriage. My ex-husband, who had been kind before we married, became a puppet for his mother after the wedding. The first day she came to our house, I was out for an appointment, which upset her. She cried to my husband about wanting to be friends with me, and he, without hearing my side, yelled at me for not being there. The mother-in-law's attempts to get along were insincere, as she used every opportunity to criticize me publicly. She'd make hurtful comments about my cooking and weight, and her behavior only drove a wedge between us. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law also joined in, mocking me and laughing at my expense. When my ex-husband called, begging for help, I felt no empathy. Their past behavior had made it clear that they were not worth my time or effort. I told him firmly that I wouldn't help and hung up, blocking his number. Anticipating further attempts to contact me, I decided to change my phone number. However, my ex-husband and his family didn't respect our legal agreement. One night, they showed up at my house at 11 p.m., banging on the door and demanding entry, claiming we were family and I should help them. Their disregard for my privacy and the time of day was the last straw. Late one night, my ex-husband and his family showed up at my house, banging on the door and making a racket. They ignored my request to leave and continued causing a disturbance. I tried to communicate with them through the intercom, but they didn't listen. Frustrated and worried, I almost called the police. Luckily, a neighbor must have called them because I heard sirens outside. When the group realized the police were coming, they tried to leave, but by then, a crowd had gathered, making it impossible for them to escape. The police escorted them to the station, and I explained everything that happened. News about the incident spread quickly through the neighborhood, and a co-worker of my ex-husband's was among the crowd. By the next day, everyone in his office knew what had happened. With his company now aware of the situation and his pay cut already causing trouble, my ex-husband was fired. Unable to afford his apartment rent, he had a falling out with his sister's family, leading to their group living situation breaking down. Now, my ex-husband and his mother live in public housing and both work multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet.